the Ukrainians are winning what I think will be remembered as their war of independence, albeit 30 years after initial independence, both because of tremendous heroism and will to fight, but also because they are clearly dynamically finding ways in which to strike at Russian vulnerabilities while doing so with very few resources and being, again, as you say, highly innovative in everything they do.
A new age of naval warfare has been inaugurated in the Black Sea, defined by an emerging weapon. Ukraine has employed explosive, uncrewed surface vessels, USVs, as formidable weapons against Russian fleets and even infrastructure, like prior transformative weapons such as torpedoes and anti ship missiles. USVs could have a large impact on future naval tactics, equipment, and even the design of fleets. I'm quoting from the RAND Corporation blog written by Dr. Scott Savitz. Dr. Savitz is a senior engineer at the RAND Corporation. His research focuses on how to improve the effectiveness and resilience of operational forces through the use of new technologies and modified tactics. Dr. Savitz has been involved with military exercises, operations, and planning around the globe, primarily for maritime services. He has a bachelor's degree from Yale University, as well as a master's degree and PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Savitz, welcome to the Over the Horizon podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Roydan. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so let's start off with your blog. I think you've pretty much nailed it very, very succinctly, calling it the dawn of a new age of naval warfare. Help us understand why you feel this is the case.
So there are a couple of reasons. The first is that these systems have a phenomenal capability for inflicting damage, whereas missiles and air-based kamikaze UAVs, uncrewed aerial vehicles, can do damage against a ship, particularly against its superstructure. The ability to blow a big hole at the waterline close to many systems that may be stored, such as munitions, so close to the engines and so on, is a real game changer for naval warfare. It's a new vulnerability. We've seen we've seen attacks like this in the past. For example, the attack on the USS Cole using an explosive boat guided by humans who wanted to sacrifice themselves. This opens the door to a lot more capability, a lot more swarming by multiple systems, potentially the design of low visibility systems that create that create a great difficulty in detection. The second piece is that it is inherently hard to guard against because of the capability to swarm, because of the ability to have a reduced visibility profile, and it's a particular threat in confined waters where ships can't take advantage of opportunities to maneuver.
And we're seeing the video of this particular attack on Sevastopol Bay. Take us through your understanding of what we can gather from the tactics employed here. And this is, I think, one of the Russian helicopters trying to target one of the drones.
So based on publicly available sources, what we know is that there seem to have been a number of these USVs, uncrewed surface vessels,
Hmm.
that entered that entered the facility alongside some UAVs, uncrewed aerial vehicles,
Hmm.
and the precise numbers of each are still being debated, as is the extent of damage. And this is a case where those who know aren't talking, and those who are giving lots of specifics about exactly what happened may or may not have the details. But what we do know is that that at least some substantial damage was inflicted. We also know that the Russians have not only increased their security within the port facility at Sevastopol, they have also been concerned about venturing out from it. They have had a less aggressive posture in the Black Sea. And these secondary effects of forcing Russians to be more on their guard and being hesitant to put their ships at risk may in fact be the most important ones from the attack, rather than the immediate
Indeed,
damage
indeed,
inflicted.
and that essentially is, I think, in modern military history or naval history, perhaps one of the most audacious, most innovative uses of technology and tactics for area denial, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And it's being done not only with tremendous creativity, but also on a shoestring.
Mm,
That there's a lot of apparent improvisation,
yeah.
but the result has been very effective weapon systems.
The Ukrainians' ability, the intrepid, uncanny ability to just take what they have and run with it and innovate on the fly. It's amazing. It's astounding, um, the manner in which they've been able to, with such a small force, use technology and innovative tactics as force multipliers.
The Ukrainians are winning what I think will be remembered as their War of Independence, albeit 30 years after initial independence, both because of tremendous heroism and will to fight, but also because they are clearly dynamically finding ways in which to strike at Russian vulnerabilities,
Hmm,
while doing so with very few resources, and being, again, as you say, highly innovative in everything they do. Also, finding ways to unsettle Russian forces, taking advantage of the psychological impact of
hmm,
what they can do,
hmm,
and again, the secondary effects of this effective area denial of
hmm.
Russian ships pulling back,
Right.
is tremendous.
Okay. Let's just step back a bit and kind of go back a few weeks to the attack on the Kerch bridge in Crimea. This again, I think, pretty much shocked everybody watching, um, and kind of gave us a lot of very valuable insights into, or perhaps the first inkling of just what the Ukrainians were capable of. It was audacious, it was innovative, and it struck the Russians where it hurt their logistical supplies, their military logistical supplies the most. And I don't think it doesn't look like they've recovered from this.
So this is Putin's bridge. It's
Right.
not only critical for logistics; it's also a symbol of uniting Crimea, which they annexed in 2014, to the
Mm,
rest of Russia. And the Russian authorities were quite swift to claim that there was a truck bomb, which then also ignited a train full of fuel adjacent to it. They
Right.
arrested a number of alleged perpetrators. I have serious doubts about this. Based on reviews by people who have far more forensic knowledge than I do,
Hmm.
they've identified, no, this doesn't make sense to have. It doesn't look like a truck bomb attack. It
Is that because of the damage inflicted, or is that because of the
Exactly.
nature of the explosion?
I've heard commentaries primarily based on the damage inflicted, and that it doesn't look like what a truck bomb would inflict.
Hmm.
I've also heard comments about the video of the initial explosion. Again, I am not the forensic expert to be able to characterize that, but it also makes a great deal of sense in the context that it would be something from below. Bridges are
Hmm.
designed to withstand a lot of damage from
Hmm.
natural events.
Right.
They are, however, unusually vulnerable from below. To get the quantity of explosives required to do serious damage to the bridge, even with the
Hmm.
amplifying effect of a train full of fuel,
Hmm.
it's likely that this was also an uncrewed vessel, a USV, and or perhaps multiples. We don't know,
Hmm.
but that would seem to make the most sense in terms of inflicting that damage. And of
Right.
course, the symbolism was heightened by the fact that it was done right on Putin's 70th birthday,
Birthday. Yeah.
give or take a day.
Yeah.
And they were, and the direct logistical impact is huge. That
Hmm.
just forcing Russia to now resupply much of its material into the Kherson region via ships that are taking material across the strait is inevitably a lot slower, and most of the time involved is not the crossing; it's the loading and unloading on
Yeah.
each side.
Hmm.
And while currently Russia does have a land bridge connecting Russian territory through Russian occupied territory in eastern and southern Ukraine,
Correct.
all the way to the front.
Hmm.
However, that's a more vulnerable area.
Yeah.
Taking the Crimean route gave them a substantial advantage in terms
Right.
of having sheltered logistics.
Indeed.
But with the combination of the Kerch Strait bridge attack and the attack in Sevastopol, the Ukrainians have made it clear that that Crimea, which they was taken from them 8 years ago,
Hmm.
is not some kind of a secure rear bastion from which Russia can attack them or can build up its forces and maintain them. It has become a part of the fighting, and Ukrainians are deeply unsettling Russian forces and commanders.
Indeed. All right. On our screens now is a picture of one of the sea drones uh, that had washed up ashore in the days prior to the attack on the Kerch Bridge. Um, and from the subsequent videos that we saw emerging from the attack itself on Sevastopol, there seem to be a lot of similarities. And help us understand what you make of this structure. It seems to be very light, very maneuverable. It has a very low profile. Um, just what do you make of it, and what do you what's the innovation in this, and help us understand why this has been such an effective tool.
if I were trying to design something on the cheap to be an explosive USV, I would probably be thinking about something along these lines. As you say, it has a low profile, it rides low in the water. One of
Hmm.
the advantages of using a USV versus a manned vessel
Right.
for this kind of attack is that you don't need space for humans or any of their support requirements, and you can design the vessel around just the payload and and fuel and something that gives it some situational awareness and communications. And that's pretty much it. And with further resources and refinements, something could be made with perhaps just a protruding tube that served as an air intake and exhaust and antenna. But this is pretty close. So,
But there does seem to be something like a camera structure on top of it, and we've seen, um, I think was it infrared videos, an
yes.
infrared feed from the video of the attack, the actual attack on Sevastopol harbor. So it's not just a blunt weapon; it does have pretty serious technology packed into a very small shape and form.
Yes, and one of the revolutions currently going on with respect to military capabilities is just the shrinking size and cost of so many sensors and tools for communication, that it's possible now to put something very compact, lightweight, and not terribly expensive that can provide that real-time live feed to controllers at a great distance, so yes, it's not just a cannonball. It has some capability to provide consistent, timely awareness of its environment to its controllers.
Right, and we
And
do see, and we're watching. What we see now is this: the Russian helicopter trying to target one of these drones, and it does have the ability to maneuver pretty deftly, making it very agile as well in the water.
Absolutely. Also, unlike a vessel with a crew,
Hmm.
the softest targets are missing.
Right.
That it's hard to take this thing down, given how little is protruding above the waterline. Given that you don't need a human being there who can get hit in order to control it.
Hmm. So how difficult does this then? How difficult a prospect is it to defend against a fleet of these by
It's
themselves and a fleet of them in combination with a fleet of aerial drones?
so the so It depends on the precise circumstances and the degree to which a fleet or a ship is able to achieve good domain awareness in its immediate environment. There are two problems for the defender. The first is detection, and
Hmm.
to encompass also classifying something as a threat and identifying it as, yes, this is definitively something we need to target.
What are the
And
I'm sorry to
Sure.
interject, but just help us understand what the challenges are when it comes to detecting these vessels.
There's a lot of movement on the water. And depending on what type of environment you're in,
Hmm.
you can be faced with a lot of essentially noise that in which these types of USVs can be concealed, and just the physical environment is dynamic, let alone if there is boat traffic, perhaps something being conducted by your own side,
Hmm.
or if you're in a port, or if you're simply in a reasonably high traffic area.
Hmm.
So using any number of signature detection capabilities, you may not perceive these until it's reasonably late.
Hmm.
Now, once you've detected them, then shooting at them and the degree of success that you can achieve within a very short timeline is it depends on what capabilities you have on board the ship or perhaps off-board systems. As these capabilities grow, as they proliferate, it's likely that warships will develop ever more capability to try to target these at a distance. That said, they do have ample armament, but the problem is being able to shoot precisely and quickly, perhaps at a number of them. And if there's distraction in the form of an aerial attack at the same time as one that's going on at the waterline, and we can speculate other kinds of attack could be used in future scenarios. So, for example, that if there were any kind of jamming or a cyber attack or anything like this, those kinds of things would further exacerbate the difficulties of being able to respond effectively to a very fleet, agile threat that can have a devastating impact.
I believe it was a combination of aerial and maritime drones that were deployed in the sinking of the Moskva. And that really was the first kind of look at the deadly potential that these drones have.
So the Moskva, at least according to some news reports, the effects seem to be coming primarily from some kind of aerial weapon. So there's conflicting information, and we may not get a definitive public account until well after the war is over. But that appears to have been at least mostly an aerial attack. Now, warships are designed to be durable and resilient, and we've seen any number of warships that have managed to hold up with varying degrees of capability after being attacked from the air. For example, in the 1980s, the USS Stark was hit by an Iraqi missile during the Iran-Iraq War, and at least all accounts since then are that was an accident. But the Stark survived. The Moskva, whether it's some kind of failures of damage control or some kind of issue in its design, the Moskva appeared to sink fairly rapidly, and was certainly not able to maintain combat capabilities even for a few moments after the hit.
All right, let me just pull up a map of Sevastopol and talk us through why hitting the ships that were anchored at Sevastopol Bay was such a crucial target for the Ukrainians. The implications, we've spoken about the implications of area denial. Let's talk a bit about a bit more about Russia's ability to supply food, fuel, and troops to the eastern bank of the Dnipro, the rest of Kherson, and down south to Crimea. Looking ahead at the mud season in October, in November, the winter, and then up to spring. It's going to this is really seriously curtailing Russia's abilities to maintain supply lines and logistical lines.
Yes, and again, there's a dual impact. One is the direct military effects, hindering Russia's ability to conduct operations the way it wants to, and the second is the psychological / political that yes, targeting these ships in the harbor is disruptive to Russia's attempts to dominate the Black Sea. It's hitting the Kerch Strait Bridge, which, by the way, is not entirely disabled, but but has a great deal of damage to it.
Yes.
Hitting that is making their whole logistical problem harder. But then also, Putin has staked a lot on Crimea, and Crimea is very symbolic for a lot of Russians. Russia took Crimea from the Ottoman Empire in 1783, so almost two and a
Right.
half centuries ago.
Yes.
And fought against British, French, and Ottoman troops in the Crimean Peninsula, the places that we're now hearing about again were a big deal in the Crimean War in the 1850s. This is and so. And so rattling Russian forces there, and in a territory that has been formally annexed by Russia, and for almost a decade. Really irks the Russians, really raises Ukrainian morale, and calls into question Putin's or Russia's ability to dominate the situation in the war that it began back in February.
Right.
But certainly any kind of disruption to logistics moving through Crimea is helpful to Ukrainians as they attempt to retake territory in their south.
So help us understand the attack on the Kerch Bridge, and then the sea drone attack on Sevastopol harbor and the ships that were anchored there. How much of an added impact, or were these the events that tipped the scales in favor of the Russians, in favor of the Ukrainians, beg your pardon, forcing the Russians to then withdraw from Kherson?
They're not the only they're not the only factor by a long shot, and it's hard to say to what degree one factor might have contributed more than another. Russia's decision to retreat from the west bank of the river was likely driven by a lot of considerations, most notably a perception that they would not be able to hold it, and they ran the risk of losing large numbers of forces.
Plus, their
But
supply lines were severely curtailed, severely
the,
hampered.
that's part of it. Also, the fact that the Ukrainians have done any number of outstanding offensives and attacks on land. So it's a mix of factors. The attenuating their supply lines via Crimea certainly helps a great deal, but. But they also have to keep in mind the fact that the Ukrainians are being, as you said, very innovative, and certainly have demonstrated a far greater will to fight than Putin ever anticipated. And so, yes, they pulled out of Kherson. They may have perceived that it was undesirable to get into urban fighting. No army likes fighting in cities. It's a terrible environment.
Yeah.
But
And I don't think the Russians had the numbers to hold on to territory that they'd captured.
They've been struggling with that, and to the extent that we have publicly available data on Russian numbers, they don't look favorable for Putin. Despite Russia having a little over triple the population of Ukraine, they've been having a great deal of difficulty getting numbers of personnel and the logistical support that they need, and the machines that they drive or use into the right places at the right times. And so
Right.
in many cases, the Ukrainians have been able to counter them, sometimes with inferior numbers, but sometimes even perhaps with effectively superior numbers in some fights, owing to Russian misallocation of logistics or insufficient support for logistics, even where they have the routes, let alone when some of their key links have been severed.
Right. And we're looking at the animation, this animation from the Institute for Study of War, which details the withdrawal of Russian forces from Kherson and the recapture of territory. And it's really clear that all territory now to the west of the Dnieper River is now under Ukrainian control, and therefore the Ukrainians can now use artillery to target the Russian positions on the eastern bank and deeper into Kherson.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
what options do you see that remain for the Russians to continue supplying their forces, food, fuel, men? How does supply get into Kherson, and how do they hold on to Crimea?
So increasingly, they are likely to be reliant on the alternate route via the territory they've seized in eastern and southern Ukraine and delivering material that way.
Mhm.
However, that is inherently more vulnerable to a variety of types of attacks from artillery, from small units or resistance forces within the occupied Ukrainian territory. They're they can do it. There's a contiguous zone that they nominally control, but in practice, it's going to be a lot harder. They're going to lose a lot more, and the
Yeah,
formidable logistics problems that
yeah,
that we've seen from day one are likely to get much worse.
yeah. And don't discount partisan attacks that we're seeing around Melitopol and other areas. So
Yes.
then, do you see any option for maritime supplies through the Sea of Azov?
They can do it. Incidentally, one of the actions that resulted from construction of the Kerch Strait Bridge was precisely that it was an attempt to seal off the Sea of Azov to large ships.
Hmm.
That when Russia built the bridge, it intended to entrap Ukrainian vessels that were inside the Sea of Azov. There's potential for doing that, but again, that there's a load, move, unload cycle that makes everything take appreciably longer. And port facilities also make excellent targets, either for artillery or missiles, or perhaps by saboteurs or partisans.
Yeah.
There are many vulnerabilities that can be exploited, and it simply takes longer in a situation where efficiently moving material is critical to being able to sustain combat capability.
Looks like it's the perfect storm. Um, their supply lines through the Kerch Bridge have been severely impacted. There's area denial in the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea uh, following the attack on Sevastopol. The easy targets east of the Dnipro River for Ukrainian artillery and innovative tactics. You've also got partisan attacks taking place in the Zaporizhia region and Kherson. And there's a critical choke point, the canal that supplies water to the Crimea. And
Yes.
if the Ukrainians cut that off, it's looking very bleak for the Russians in Crimea.
It really is that getting 2 million people the water quantities of fresh water necessary to survive is a very challenging task in the absence of the delivery of that water from southern Ukraine. And there's there's not a great technical solution to that in any way you slice it. The retaking Crimea could be challenging insofar as there's only a very narrow isthmus between mainland Ukraine and the Crimean Peninsula itself, which might make it necessary for Ukrainian troops to launch some kind of amphibious attack, which is always challenging. But certainly Russia looks more vulnerable with respect to Crimea than they had, I think, ever anticipated at the outset of this war.
Speaking of amphibious attacks, I'm sorry to interject. Speaking of
Please.
amphibious attacks, we've been seeing a lot of activity that are believed to be Ukrainian special forces. This is around the Kherson region. These are videos. We have not been able to independently verify these, but the Ukrainians claim that these are special forces headed to the Crimean region, which then will put additional pressure on the Russians there.
Absolutely, to the extent that special forces or pro-Ukrainian Crimeans are conducting operations behind Russian lines that can be very disruptive and make the Russians still more vulnerable. Perhaps worst of all, from the Russian perspective, will be the self-inflicted wounds that if they are either hostile to elements of the local population as they start to fear that everyone is a potential saboteur or supporting special forces, or if they are wasting copious resources trying to search for elusive special forces, they can really shoot themselves in the foot. It can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. The fear of losing Crimea can result in it. They seem to, at least in parts of this war right now, be searching for defensible lines that they can achieve, so that they can protect what they have acquired to date. So retreating, for example, to the east bank of the Dnieper River seems like an attempt to secure their gains. And a river crossing is always challenging for an army. The Russians know that, and so perhaps they may be anticipating that this will be the permanent border. That said, the Ukrainians, having shifted the tide of battle, appear to be in no mood to accept the continued occupation of large swaths of their country, and are likely to keep pushing both with direct attacks from territory they control and by having personnel of various stripes inside Russian-occupied territory, creating a disruption and contributing to the downfall of the Russian occupation.
And President Zelensky has vowed to take back Crimea. The Ukrainians seem to be in no mood to give even an inch of their territory if they can help it. There's a lot of talk of this being the opportune time to return to negotiations and the peace table, but the Ukrainians don't seem to be in a mood. They seem to have to be enjoying the upper hand. They seem intent on keeping the momentum going. What's there to stop them from pushing forward and trying to take all of Crimea back?
We've talked about some of the obstacles to their being able to do so, but on the other hand, as you pointed out, the vulnerability of the water supply, if once it falls under Ukrainian control, assuming that it does, may make that possible. It's not clear how Russia and the world would react to a severe loss of water supplies in Crimea. And of course, Russian propaganda would likely try to take advantage of this. Uh,
Indeed,
but uh,
indeed. It-
but Russia, but at this point, while there are many voices who are saying we should find a way to end this horrible war,
mm,
that Ukrainians, particularly those who have endured Russian occupation, recognizing the tremendous human cost of continuing to fight, are also highly cognizant of the costs of choosing to allow millions of their compatriots to remain under occupation and giving potentially Putin a springboard for future wars of conquest. And to the extent that they refuse to renounce pieces of their country, then despite whatever pressure may be put on them by others or whatever recommendations may be put out there,
mm.
it doesn't seem like a negotiated peace is possible in the near term until Ukraine has recovered at least most, if not all, of the territory that Russia has taken since 2014.
So the withdrawal from Kherson has been historic, but it's been humiliating for the Russians.
Yes.
It doesn't bode well if the Russians have to withdraw from Crimea or if they lose Crimea. Do you
Yes.
think that that is when? So there's a lot of talk about strategic nukes being used and deployed, and do you think if Putin loses Crimea, is that going to be the tipping point for him? Is that going to be the last straw?
There's only one person who really knows what's going on in Putin's mind, and that's Putin.
Mm,
Uh, he, he for 20 years he played a relatively bad hand of cards extraordinarily well. He was
yeah.
able to achieve a great deal in terms of acquiring slivers of territory, a fifth of the country of Georgia. He was able to pay virtually no penalty for his seizure of Ukrainian territory in 2014.
Mm,
He's tried to highlight Russia is back and Russia is a great power once again, and so on. And he did extraordinarily well with that until February of this year. And whatever changed in his decision making process, maybe isolation induced by COVID or any number of other factors that may have influenced him, possible declining health, and we really don't know at a public
do
level
you
what that might
do
be.
you really think isolation during COVID has played a role in this? Because it seems to me that this is an extended. This is just an extension of his playbook, something that he's been employing for the past close to 2 decades.
Certainly yes, parts of it are, but being bold and ambitious enough to say, I am now going to take Ukraine, and believing that he would be able to hold a
Mm,
parade in the streets of Kiev,
yeah,
that he has always had hubristic ideas about restoring the
yeah,
Soviet Union, or really restoring Peter the Great's empire. But
indeed.
uh, um, was some of this accelerated by some combination of recognition of his own age and not wanting a successor to claim glory?
Mm,
Was it a belief? Was it some kind of paranoia? And fear that the West really is out to get him. Is
right.
so we can play amateur psychologist, and frankly,
Yeah,
frankly,
but
without access to the immediate circle of
yeah,
Putin,
it's very
none
difficult
of
to
us
say so.
know.
Yeah, but I on an earlier episode with Brigadier General Mark Kimmett,
Mhm.
he made a very interesting point about Russia adopting American thunder run tactics.
Hmm.
And you saw those lines, supply lines, 60-kilometer long supply lines, and the convoys that were headed to Kiev. But it just seems to me that perhaps Putin was relying it. Perhaps the military plan was to control and hold territory, and that he was hoping that the FSB would do its job. The intelligence would do its job and turn local politicians, local leaders, and the local population against the Ukrainian leadership, flip over to Russia, and it would be easier for the Ukrainian army to then just roll in and take territory. And that doesn't seem to have gone according to plan. Does that resonate with you?
That's possible. It's so. I guess one lesson for the world from this is to never underestimate the delusions of top leadership, particularly when it really, really wants something and has
Mm,
lost some degree of contact with the real world. And when it surrounds itself with people who are happy to tell it what it wants to tell that leadership what it wants
yeah,
to hear. We've seen this in other contexts really throughout history, and Putin is not the first to have these grandiose ambitions and be seen as a refounder of his country, only to find himself faced with disaster, partly because at least it appears, because he misread the willingness of Ukrainians to
yeah.
embrace a potential conquest or conquest by or union with Russia.
Mm,
It's so he he appears to have made a monumental mistake, but you're right. Aspects of it do jive with what he's done in Georgia, even some of his actions with respect to Chechnya and so on.
indeed, indeed. All right, let's just before we wrap, let's just get back to the subject of sea drones or maritime drones. And you've in your and I want to go back to your blog where you talk about the fact that this as a tactic and as a military weapon, this is not new. We've seen the Americans and other countries work towards developing not only remote but autonomous maritime drones. Um, and DARPA has been doing some interesting work with the Seahawk. Um, is this the future of our navies around the world, or at least Western navies to begin with?
So certainly the role of USVs will grow.
Hmm.
There will continue to be a desirability of having personnel on board large ships. That when there are maintenance problems in a complex set of systems, then machines can't be automated. You need human intelligence to try to figure out ways in which to fix those.
Mm,
That at least for some time, USVs will be complementary. They will serve as weapons, as we've seen in the examples we've discussed. They will serve to provide intelligence. They can provide protection in some cases.
mm,
One way in which to interdict something coming at you at the waterline is to have something else that can shoot at it and
yeah.
or if necessary crash into it in order to prevent it from hitting its target.
Mm,
So they will be increasingly important. That said, we're not likely to see large ships, the equivalent of a cruiser destroyer or a an aircraft carrier, anything like this, go completely without personnel for many decades to come. There's still a lot of value in having human judgment when faced with a mix of types of information and challenges that may not have been anticipated when the vessel left port.
Indeed. And as far as the war in Ukraine is concerned, you do see um, the continuous evolution of sea drones, especially the ones deployed by Ukraine.
Yes, they have certainly developed a great capability that they will likely continue to refine it, and as with many. As with many aspects of defense acquisition, it's going to be a question of resources. They also have other demands, obviously, but but certainly they are learning, and now that Russia anticipates these threats, the Russians will likely be learning too. We will likely see some kind of a countermeasure dynamic in which the two sides are each trying to enable or prevent attacks using these types of systems. And USVs are also likely to continue to be used for a variety of other purposes. Certainly, having these lurk in unobtrusive places or briefly pass locations of interest, and then relay back intelligence to where they're needed to become maritime scouts. Is an invaluable contribution, or comms relays, or a host of other capabilities.
So they can be a force multiplier in various ways, not just as attack vessels.
Absolutely. For in some cases, for mine clearance, they may be able to either detect mines. They may be able to sweep mines by pulling special gear behind them. They may be able to simply face an attrition rate of 1 per mine, and that's deemed an acceptable loss rate in order to achieve breakthrough in a particular water space.
Indeed, fascinating. And you've rightly said that a new age of naval warfare is upon us, and I'm sure there is literally so much to talk about when it comes to this new age of naval warfare. But we'll have to leave it at that for this episode. I hope to have you back on very soon to talk more about this as we see the evolution of this new technology and the fascinating implications for maritime security around the world. Dr. Savitz, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for yours. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.